TitleMatchNetwork.com.
So I guess your first gig with WCW was as the Master Blaster, right?
Right.
Okay. What are your memories of that whole deal?
I mean, it was, I had long black hair. I was working at a strip club. And, Ole said I got an idea for it. He told me he wanted me to have a red mohawk, which I just thought like,
Right.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those deals like, oh, and now I can't even have a normal life. Now I'm going to look like a pro wrestler. And, which I always took it as, okay, this is one of those situations. They're going to test you to see if you'll balk at doing something. And then they gave me a partner who was supposed to lead me as I, got seasoned, who was greener than I was.
Right.
He lasted 6 days and quit. He was illiterate, couldn't read.
Who was that again?
His name was Corey Pendarvis.
Okay.
It was broken in by the legendary worker, Ox Baker.
Huh. He's a trip.
Yeah. And so, a week into my first run, I don't have a partner. And while I'm in Hammond, Indiana, and Al Green was in the locker room. Al was working first match as a heel. And Al had a kind of funky hairdo, so they threw Al and me together. And then Al and I worked together for probably maybe 6-7 months. And then they wanted him to do a job. It was around Christmas time. We were supposed to job at the Steiners. He hemmed and hawed about it. They fired him.
Right.
Sent me home. Told me to grow my hair out, and they're going to repackage me. So I, at this point, it's been my first year, and I probably had maybe 40 matches,
wow.
Total. And then the next year, I just sat around. Then they put that Oz gimmick on me.
That was my next question. Who came up with the Oz gimmick?
That was Dusty's brainstorm.
What were your initial, impressions of that whole idea?
That was fucking ridiculous. I've said it a million times to people. I know it's redundant, but he sat there and told me, you're going to be Oz. I just said, Oz is a geographical region. It's the Wizard of Oz. He's the wizard. The guy behind the curtain. I said, no, he's the wizard.
Right.
Oz is that's where they're at. And he just looked at me, and I just thought, like, okay, he's my boss. I always thought, to this day, I think it was a rib.
Right.
I just think it was, because I did it like 2 or 3 times, and that was it. I sat for another whole year.
How did you wind up with the Vinnie Vegas character?
They were 0 for 2 on Gimmicks, so they were going to give me one shot. So I watched that Blue Heaven movie with Steve Martin.
Right.
And I thought it was a pretty cool character. So I kind of just copied that along with some other characters. I just kind of put that together myself. So it's good enough to entertain Shawn Michaels, which was key. Shawn Michaels watched it on TV and liked it. And that's why he wanted me to come in and be his bodyguard.
Right.
So,
now, before all that happened, I guess who was your mentor around this period of time? Did anybody take you under their wing?
Yeah,
Rick Rude.
Yeah, wow. Rude was my guy. Yeah.
What are some of the valuable lessons that he taught you?
Never take your gimmicks until you're 50 miles close to the next town. Rick's whole thing was he was the first guy that I really watched that could do he could have people, laugh, cry, be hostile and hate him. I mean, he really was able to change his gears and turn emotion in the ring. But he was the first guy I saw that was a pure entertainer. He'd work his ass off, he'd snag on your back, but when it came time for you to come back, nobody fed a comeback like Rude.
Right.
He really just got up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. And took those crazy ass bumps. But he also he had created a character, and you'd see him backstage. He'd be walking, smoking a cigarette. That music would kick. He'd throw the cigarette out and go out. And as soon as that light hit him, you could just see that character. He created a character that was very close to his own character that he was able to slide into really easy, no matter what was going on. And that's one thing he told me. He said, the closer your character is to you, then you're always going to be on. If it's a far reach for you, then it's going to be hard. And a lot of times, that's what happens when the promoter, determines that he's going to give you a gimmick. if it doesn't fit you, then it's pretty much uphill battle for you.
I was going to ask you around this time period, was Flair booking at this time period at all, or was that later on?
I mean,
I know they had the committee.
I think they had the committee then.
Okay.
I don't think Rick had the pencil then.
At that point in time, what were your thoughts of Rick as a booker?
You know what? You're so green at that. You wouldn't know a good idea, if you heard one.
You're still in the process of learning the business.
Yeah, I was, and it was there was such a separation between that crew of guys, the Wyndhams and that clique of guys, and then the Johnny B. Bads and me, and the guys that we used to say in center stage, the guys in the right locker room.
Huh.
The guys that were making less than $150 a year.
All right.
So there was, you just were happy to have your job, and they made it that situation. They made it, where you were just happy to have a job.
Huh. What were your thoughts on Jim Herd?
I thought he was a punch drunk I mean, it's just like one of those deals where you look at a guy and you're like, okay, how's this guy in charge?
All right.
Like, what is, and I forget what his background. His background
Pizza
was like,
Hut,
something like that. Typical of that Turner administration.
Did you see a lot of that guys come in for the spot, like Kip Fry and all that? And
I mean, Kip Fry, it just one after another. It was just like. And that was the whole thing. They brought Bischoff in, and Bischoff, was there and hired before I left to go to New York. And he pulled me aside. He said, "Don't go. I'm going to turn this thing around." I was just thinking, dude, you're like a Ken doll. You look like a weatherman,
right?
Like I didn't know him,
right.
And he really took offense to that. I found out later that he asked me personally to stay because he, I think, saw something in me. But it's like anything else, at that point I had to get out. Yeah, I was a fan. I grew up in Detroit, south side of Detroit, so we had big time wrestling out of Detroit. And like most kids, you go through a period where you watch it, religiously, and then you kind of grow out of it. And then when I came back, I went over to Europe for a couple of years. I played some ball over there, came back, and it was kind of like the mid-Hogan era in WWF. And I went with some friends of mine down in Joe Louis and watched it. It was like, it was a lot different than the pro wrestling I had watched.
Right.
And from there, I just decided that I could do it. And it took me a while, but I, just kind of find the inroads to get into it. It's just, if you're a big guy and you go to wrestlers and say, hey, can you help me break in? The last thing they want to do is, put a 6'10" guy in the roster, have a chance for that guy to succeed at their expense. So ended up in Atlanta and ran into the Steiners at a gym. And Robbie and Scotty kind of pointed me in the right direction. And I ended up at like a WCW developmental camp,
right.
which was run by Jody Hamilton. And about 9 months later, I did the Clash of the Champions.
I was going to ask you, what was Jody Hamilton like as a trainer?
It was amazing because he was a giant. He was a big guy, heavy wise, but he could still move. I think the thing that Jody brought was he really knew the psychology. Like he taught you the psychology. Like most, I think that's the biggest thing is these kids learn how to do backflips and all this other stuff, but they don't learn the psychology of the business. Where Jody taught you the psychology and did the less is more. And he said, you're a big guy. You're not going to need to do that much.
Right.
You just have to look convincing in the few things that you do. And that's kind of the way I never really did a whole lot in my career.
Well, I guess for training wise, what was the hardest thing for you to pick up besides psychology? Or would you say that was the hardest part of the business to learn? I
think I broke into the era when guys didn't sit in the back and go over the match, step by step. You went out there and it was the same old. It was the days of the heels in one locker room, babyface in another locker room, and the referee brought the finishes back and forth.
Right.
So it's completely different if you don't know what you're doing, and the guy's out there just calling a match to you, and it's. I tell you, you can know what you're doing, but in front of a crowd and everything else the first couple of times, I was thinking this will be easy, and I went out there and it was the hardest thing I'd ever done.
As far as like during the training, was there any times where you got discouraged and you said, maybe this is not for me?
No, I mean, I set my goal to make it. I wasn't gonna, the first day I got there, they did the 500 Hindus and 500 step ups, 500 push ups, run the ropes, run around the building. They ran it till you puked, and then to see if you were stupid enough to come back. And this is when you had to pay.
Right.
It was like $3,000 or whatever it was to.
Did you have to pay?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had to pay. So it's basically, I give you $3,000. You try to get me to quit, basically torture me, and then see if I come back the next day.
Huh.
That was, and 9 out of 10 guys didn't.
All right.
You know.
So I guess
TitleMatchNetwork.com